introduce Sally Anderson.
Yeah, Sally and I have had 1,000 engagements. Right, there we are. I just want to check that I'm live. Sally, I think the number of engagements we've had, they probably go to one. No, I've been watching Sally just operating. You know, I'm new to Zoom and I'm new to global applications. I'm a South African. I'm long in the tooth. This lockdown just got me into connecting with people in the UK, and then all of a sudden I saw this Sally Anderson, and then I started seeing a CV, and as I dug into that CV, it got longer and longer and longer and longer. And then I realized that Sally Anderson is only 23 years of age, and she's got one of the longest CVs I've ever seen as a project manager, a corporate trainer, a culture specialist. I don't know what's attracted all these cultured people to us today. But Sally, I'm just so excited about who you are, the background. I know nothing about you apart from the 1,000 articles that I've read that you've actually produced. I'd love you to introduce yourself and this forum. You know, I know that you are a top flight keynote speaker. People pay you a fortune, and I've paid you tuppenny halfpenny to get across here. So I'd like you to give us the tuppenny halfpenny special, the cheapie of who Sally is and what are we about, and how can we tap into your knowledge over the next hour. Just excite us about who you are and where you're going post-COVID, and how can we all change our lives from this moment on?
Fabulous. So thank you for that introduction. So first of all, over and above acknowledging those behind the scenes, I'd also like to acknowledge all of the other speakers today. No pressure with me going first, so have it that I might be setting the tone for how the day rolls. So I believe it's a speaker's responsibility to be remembered. How many speakers have you listened to in the last 2, 5, or 10 years? Can you remember their name and can you remember their message? So my name is Sally Anderson, and the core message that I want to leave the people listening today with is that you're never given anything that you can't handle. Considering that there is a viral pandemic at the moment, there's also a fear pandemic going on. And I'm very conscious of the amount of people hurting, specifically in business. And I hope that what I share of my own journey today will be an inspiration of resilience, of what you can overcome. It's going to be raw, real, unscripted, open kimono. I'm just going to go there and we'll see what shows up. So I'm trusting the space because a bit about what I'm going to share tonight I haven't shared publicly before, but I have it that I'm ready and it's coming through. So I'm a coach intuitive. I coach to cause, not symptom. I'm a direct channel, and I'm just going to trust what comes through. So I'm going to share a bit about my journey, which I believe everybody has a life apprenticeship. Your story, everybody has a story. And I believe it is the backbone of your character on how you show up in the world. But your story doesn't define who you are. So my background is in belief, behavioral, cultural change at quite a large level. So my last assignment was 3,000 projects at the height of the assignment. I was based in Boston, Netherlands, and New York. And it was on September the 10th, before knowing what was going to happen on September the 11th. So I was accountable for 2 countries. It was a global restructure program. I loved what I was doing, but millions of dollars would be spent on these change programs that I would implement. And I knew they'd never get a return on their investment 3 to 5 years after I walked out the door. So I became fascinated by this elusive thing called sustainability, that if you're going to invest money into change, let's make sure it's sustainable. So of all of the coaches in the marketplace globally, all of the leadership service providers globally, my point of difference is focusing on sustainable change, both personally and professionally. Being in America when September 11th hit, I was relocating the program office from the Netherlands to Boston. I had a very awful coffee at the base of the Trade Center Towers, and I also took a flight to Boston just one day earlier, but I was supposed to fly on September the 11th. So being in America when September 11th hit was really my wake-up call. I felt, excuse the expression, a prostitute in the system because I cared about the change being sustainable post leaving. The consultancy company was just interested in getting paid, but I was interested because you're the one in the trenches actually implementing the change. And throughout that tenure, you know, I was shutting down billion-dollar projects that were hemorrhaging the system, making thousands of people redundant. You were never popular as a change agent. I'd also been a course junkie for 30 years. So name a book, a CD, a course, I've read it, listened to it, been to it, and I personally struggled to sustain the change. So that's where my fascination started with reference to developing my own curriculum around sustaining change. And so I came back to New Zealand in 2001. So I've been out on my own for 19 years. And during that 19 years, it's been a journey. And I went out on my own and I started up my own independent leadership coaching practice. I worked with a phenomenal man in Australia who heads up global thought leaders. People who are at the leading edge of thought are lousy at packaging themselves up and taking themselves to market. And so he assisted me in developing the curriculum that I have. I've trained over 100 coaches in my methodology. That also was quite a journey. I developed my own 3-day leadership curriculum and led that for 10 months of the year for 10 years. So leadership is the domain to which I dance, and I have had the privilege of coaching politicians and celebrities and millionaires and billionaires, and those types of people want a higher level of discretion with reference to what it is that they're sharing. So I've coached thousands of people. So over and above what I'm going to share in this part of the presentation, when we get into the Q&A section, you have one of the best coaches on the planet in front of you today. So I don't say that from my ego, I've just done the work. So if you're wanting to take notes, if you're wanting to ask me anything off the back of what I'm sharing, if there's anything going on for you, feel free to leverage in that 30-minute segment at the end. So a bit about my backstory. I was born in New Zealand. My father was a guidance counsellor in the schooling system. He was frustrated with kids who weren't academically minded. And I am my father's daughter. Legacy to me is the most profound conversation you can facilitate with a human being on the planet. What are you doing here? What is your DNA calling you to be in the world? What is unique about you? We all have a unique fingerprint. And he really was my first legacy leader. When I first went out on my own, I called myself a legacy coach. And he was my inspiration. And we had street kids in our house since I can ever remember. And I've done about 30 years of investment into the youth sector. And I'll share at the end about my passion around eradicating teen suicide. Our kids are dying and it's just not okay. So he was very ambitious. And so he picked up 4 kids. I was the youngest, and we went to Canada. And we lived there for a few years. And but there was quite a drug scene within the schooling system, and he didn't really want to bring his kids up in that environment. So we returned to New Zealand, and I was only 6 at the time, and I was a redhead, freckles, white, and I didn't look the same, sound the same, think the same. So my self-hatred started quite young, and I hated being at school because my father was at school. I loved my dad, but it was never popular to have your dad at school, and my mother was a teacher as well. And having street kids in our house, it was an interesting upbringing, but I loved skiing. And I got my first job hiring out skis at a local ski resort. And in the early 80s, a lot of kids used to hitchhike. And a friend of mine and I hitchhiked into the local township with my first pay packet. So if you can remember the first time that you got your pay packet and you could spend it on what you wanted to spend it on without your parents' influence. So it was a local township, and we were very rebellious, and we went into the public bar. And what we didn't realize at the time was that we were being cased out by a notorious gang here in New Zealand. And about probably 2 hours into the being at the public bar, my bag went missing, my girlfriend went missing, and I was thrown into a car, abducted by 8 mob members, and taken round to the local hangout. It was the worst reported gang rape in the history of New Zealand in the early 80s. So I was thrown onto a butcher's block like a sheep carcass and raped by more than 100 men. Nobody survives an experience like that. I was conscious throughout the ordeal, and I listened throughout that experience to men who didn't want to get involved, but because of the peer pressure of what was going on. That whole saying about, you know, where were you when I needed you? I was the one carrying you. I had to separate from my body, given what was being done to it, right from every orifice. And then at the end of that ordeal, they then threw me onto the back of a truck, 3 men in the back, 2 in the front, and they abducted me and took me to another gang location. The rapes continued until I lost consciousness. So I was missing for about a day and a half, and I was beaten black and blue, couldn't walk, couldn't talk. And there was an opportunity to escape, but I was too fearful. I had no clothes, and I didn't think anybody would help me. I was found by the head of the mob hangout in this particular location. And the irony of the story is that if it wasn't for him, he actually drove me back to where I was staying, which was about a 2-hour drive. Dropped me on the side of the road. It was 7 o'clock at night. It was snowing. And I went back to where I was staying. I scrubbed myself raw in a bath. I got up the next day. I went to work like nothing had happened. The police were called, and my parents were called. And in the early 80s, there was no support for the victim. And when you've gone beyond the comprehension of human terror and come back of your own accord, you kind of like learn a few things. And so I believe I am a fearless practitioner. I'll go to places no other coaches will go to get results no other coaches will get, because it's very difficult to be in this human existence when you've already experienced something that has taken you beyond the context of what psychologically, you know, most people could actually handle. That being said, I believe that the mobsters are my spiritual initiators for what I do today. I was basically sent back to school. My parents didn't know how to deal with it. What do you say to your 15-year-old daughter? So I had no support, and I lived into, you name any form of dysfunction, I lived it. So name an addiction to the extreme. Body dysmorphia, self-hatred, 24/7, inner critic, couldn't turn it off. And hence the reason why I was in courses. So most people go to courses for personal development or professional development. Yours truly was going there because I was a suicidal maniac pretty much for over a decade. And the only reason why I didn't commit suicide is that my brother died when he was 23 and I couldn't put my parents through another death. So I was pretty much back to back in every course known to man because I wanted to understand how to just get to the next day. That being said, I entered senior management at the age of 23. I was lucky enough to actually have mentors that saw something in me well before I saw it within myself. I spent 12 years in the hospitality industry, in the hotel industry, and worked my way up. So I've always been senior management, being at the board table is my norm. So I specialize at the C-suite CEO level, and that journey has been extraordinary. If you transition from everything I'd experienced during that period, if it wasn't for the people that believed in me, I wouldn't be here today, that is for sure. But what I love about what I do is stopping people hurting permanently. I've written 2 books, Free Fall, Living Life Beyond the Edge, and which is the irony of today, doing a bit of free falling, and The Co-Creative Age, the next evolutionary phase in leadership. And in writing those books, I wanted to impart what I'd learnt so that I could actually help other people. A girlfriend of mine, in the middle of trying to heal and overcome, I've done 30 years of seeing healers, name a modality, I've seen it. She said to me she had read a book called I Have Life about a South African woman who had experienced a horrendous rape in South Africa, where she got slit on the neck and gutted basically, and was left for dead by 3 men. And she said she couldn't understand, having read that book, I think it was called I Have Life, why I wasn't angry at what had happened to me. And anyway, she recommended that I read the book, and hearing her story, Alison's story, was extraordinary. But in the book, they spoke about rape and abduction syndrome. And because I had never had any support, it was the first insight into that there actually was a syndrome, and I could put my hand up for all of it. But the book was written in a way that every single person who was involved, mother wrote a chapter, the brother wrote a chapter, the policeman wrote a chapter, etc. And I finally realized that people who have experienced trauma are unable to reconcile to what happened when nobody in society wants to hear it. I've done 30 years of keynote speaking, and there has been not one incident where I have been on stage where I haven't been taken for a man, almost like I'm the depth of my voice. So when you tell them that you received so much oral abuse that damaged your vocal cords, they change. But you know, as a corporate woman standing on stage, when it was never safe to be a woman, and so you exuded a lot of masculinity. And so being misinterpreted that you were some form of transvestite or something just fit into the self-hatred. Luckily enough, I'd done enough of the work to be able to explain to people that that wasn't the case. So learning to be what it is to be a woman, specifically within the corporate arena, is something that's taken quite a number of years to learn. And over that time, I wrote 2 books. I have done 2 60-minute documentaries. The first documentary I got in front of one of my perpetrators, and which was an extraordinary experience. And it was one of the highest watched 60-minute segments in the history of 60 Minutes New Zealand. And the purpose of that documentary was that the only person who loses out of the inability to forgive is the person who can't forgive. I'd already done a life sentence. I became my own worst perpetrator. I became worse than the mob to myself. So being able to now give back what I've learnt, I've reached the level of self-actualization. I'm unconsciously competent in what I do, and that has taken something. I launched in America in 2013, led right across America, did my debut keynote in Los Angeles, which was an extraordinary experience as well. And then that was about 2013, and I always wanted to take the education that I've developed globally. Part of my passion is to be able to change the face of counseling and psychotherapy. I specialize in what I term the default identity, that identity that beats the crap out of you on a constant basis. Moment by moment by moment, we're either in our power or we're in what I term our default. And we constantly hotkey into our default identity. So in counseling and psychotherapy, the dysfunctional aspect of that, they psychoanalyze the default, whereas I disappear it. And so I'm passionate about the sustainability toolkit that I've developed to be in the hands of those working with the human condition, which is part of my passion, part of what I'm working towards. After 2013, I came back and was very passionate about being able to take the education global, and was wanting to appoint country partners in each location around the world. So I fundamentally, at that senior level, talk about love, I talk about faith, whatever that is for people, higher power, universal force, collective consciousness, God. The second book that I wrote, The Co-Creative Age, The Next Evolutionary Phase in Leadership, I believe who we are in our human form is limited, who we are in our co-creative form is limitless. And so teaching leaders to evolve to the highest level of potential is part of what I'm passionate about and part of what I teach. But part of my full disclosure today, in 2018, as we were embarking on going global, you know, everybody's journey is different. And when you teach love and faith, you attract a lot of hate. And in 2018, I experienced one of the worst character assassinations online. I've never actually read anything that lives online, but if you Google my name, it is not good. And I, over a 9-month period, experienced horrendous hatred through social media, and also it went global. CNN, Fox News, BBC World, and I stayed silent throughout the ordeal. So this is the first time I've actually spoken into it. And I tested everything in my life. I tested my education. I tested my faith. Why me? Why this? Why now? Why, when you want to heal the planet and you want to make such a difference for people, would people want to do that to you? Brene Brown did a great video on why your critics don't count, where she talks about being in the arena. and that if you have an opinion of me and you're not in the arena, maybe you need to get down into the arena and understand what it's like in the arena. And if you haven't watched that particular video, I'd highly recommend it. But also Alex Chevron spoke about haters create greatness, and talked about, you know, when you reach a tipping point in your life, specifically if you're a light worker and you're trying to bring good to the world, that there are times, I'm not the first person to undergo a character assassination, and I have no vengeance. I understand human behavior. I may not like it, but definitely as far as my life apprenticeship is concerned, it's been something that's tested me beyond the comprehension of what it means to be tested. And during that time, my husband had a triple bypass, 2 strokes, carotid artery operation on his right side to avert a 3rd stroke. And I had a breast cancer scare. And I'm just going, man, I must have had a really off day, the day that I chose this particular contract. I'm pleased to report that my husband's okay, and he's been in recovery ever since. But it's taken something. And so in October of 2019, I went off social media, and I only returned in October 2019 to LinkedIn. It's the only social media conduit that I use. And I cracked the code on how to use LinkedIn and met some phenomenal people. So I re-established my coaching practice. And so I'm based in New Zealand, but I specialize with clientele offshore and only at the high end. My passion is being able to work in behind the scenes of those making a significant difference on the planet. I do full disclosure each time I talk to those that are interested in my services. And what that's created is an environment of vulnerability, that when I share my war stories of being in the trenches, it creates a space for them to step into, and they too share their war stories. And the amount of vulnerability and what I've heard over this time has been extraordinary, especially over the COVID-19 period. And then COVID-19 hits. So the irony, I've been online for 20 years. So when people said, you know, how have you felt over this period, you know, with lockdown and so forth, we've been very lucky here in New Zealand. Obviously, you know about Jacinda Ardern, our Prime Minister, and that we don't have any community transition here in New Zealand. We feel very grateful to be in New Zealand. But I live in an isolated area out of lifestyle choice. My mother's 87, she lives in a local township. So we're in an isolated environment. So that didn't impact us. I've been online for 20 years, so I wasn't impacted from that. And leaders, given the space that I dance in, if they were unwilling to evolve, change, or grow before, they're now being forced to. So anybody who really is in the leadership space, coaching-wise, then this is rife business for us, you know, rife in the way of being able to support leaders. Traditional leadership is dead. So I teach co-creative leadership. How do you evolve beyond the humanistic realm of leadership to be able to achieve the unachievable? And now there's more susceptibility to be able to receive a message of that nature, because uncertainty is a domain that a lot of human beings are not comfortable with. And if you're familiar with the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, the 8 steps of transformation, we're born connected, we're born fearless, and we're born intuitive, and then we forget. And then we get absorbed into the known realm, which is limited. And so returning leaders back into the ability to be able to re-access their intuition, their GPS system, being able to be fearless in their leadership is a profound privilege. So as far as what I'm doing now, I have formed a joint venture partnership with a colleague in the US, and in the leadership development, cultural change, high-level leadership coaching space. I have joined these WhatsApp groups with the amazing Mark Jarrett, and I'm not a WhatsApp user by any shape of the imagination, but joining this virtual network where globally it is extraordinary, the people that I'm meeting, and feel very, very blessed. I am passionate about the establishment of co-creative schools, co-creative universities, having mastery of the inner critic in the schooling system. Nobody talks about the inner critic. To be human is to have an inner critic. It annihilates human potential, but nobody's talking about it. I can talk to a 9-year-old child with a heinous inner critic. I can talk to a 49-year-old client with 4 decades of self-abuse. It fascinates me that we do not have, that it should be part of the core curriculum as much as it is maths or science. The Youth Foundation. Prior to the character assassination, I was about to launch the first youth program, the first sustainable youth program. So I worked with a group of youth. I took them through my 3-day leadership program, and then I asked them to actually pull it apart and co-create and co-design from a teenager's perspective what they wanted. So we developed a 5-day program with a 12-month follow-through. So that education I'm passionate about, was never launched, obviously due to the character assassination, but I'm very passionate to be able to work with youth, and given the suicide rates that we're experiencing globally, not just for youth, but also for the adult sector, I do believe that the education that I've developed specifically around the sustainability piece is going to be mission critical. So the youth is a passion project of mine. The co-creative schools are a passion project of mine. I'm in the process of writing my 3rd book, Equanimous Leadership, leading from the equanimous realm. Economy is my favorite word. The ability to remain undisturbed in the face of good or ill fortune, not how it could have been, should have been, wanted it to be. Being able to train leaders to just be the observer. All of human suffering is a function of what we make things mean. If you can stop making things mean something, then you can stop suffering. And so that's pretty much a core mission. And I coach people privately all around the world. And so it's taken something to recover from the character assassination, but it's actually had me come back into my own saddle. And I'm clean, you know, to do this work, you have to be clean. And I'm not talking about hygiene here. I teach love. Love is all there is. And being able to teach that at the most senior level is a profound gift. I could keep going there, Ivan, but I'm happy to answer any questions on anything that I've raised.
Wow, Sally, what can you say? I'm sure we're sitting all here in rapt attention. What an amazing story, and what a privilege for us to be able to hear your story this morning. So thank you so much. Yeah, folks, if you'd like to ask Sally a question or raise a comment, please, if you know how to put up your virtual hand, you can do that on the participants thing, and I'll unmute you. But we can otherwise.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
I think everybody's sitting here in absolute awe and amazement and stunned by your story.
No, listen,
except for Trevor, yeah.
Yeah, if I can come in, you know, the word is gobsmacked. And one of the things, listen, the most intriguing thing for me, and I'm curious, and you can see I have no shame of any kind, Sally. When you got a moment after answering all the profound questions that come up, I want to know all about this stuff and where that comes from, what's it about, the story that I want to hear all about that stuff. But what a story. I'm in love already.
So just to speak into that, again, I have never done this publicly either. So about 5 years ago, so I'm a coach intuitive, I receive information, and part of what I teach leaders is to trust what comes through intuitively. And I'm a true believer that if you are a leader, you need to be walking your own talk. I avoided what was coming through for over 2 years. And so within New Zealand, the indigenous culture is the Māori culture. I'm a Pākehā, which means in Māori means a white person. So it's very controversial for a white woman to adopt aspects of what is predominantly Māori. So I had the privilege of, it's called a mokokoi, and the women wear it on the chin. Usually a Māori woman, not a Pākehā woman. And we followed protocol and the understanding of being gifted to receive it. It's not like going and getting a tattoo. It was a 5-hour vigil. It was a purely channeled process. When it was being done, I went somewhere and I came back, and it's on your face. So it's the bravest thing I've ever done. What it represents for me is that it's me acknowledging me for what I've overcome, because nobody in society has ever acknowledged that it happened. I believe that I represent something in society that, and I do aspire to be able to speak at the UN one day about, there are many people who have experienced many atrocities in their lives, and I believe I am a beacon for what it means to be fully healed. My past does not impact my future. You know when you're fully healed, when you can be thankful for what you have experienced, that it's been imperfection. And that can land like a cup of cold sick for some people who are still in the process of healing what it is that they've experienced. The design is simplistic, which denotes that I make transformation easy. So I love bringing simplicity to complexity. And I believe I'm not formally trained in anything, but I've been in the trenches for many years and have had the privilege of being able to understand the human psyche from a different perspective. So I've led many workshops to psychiatrists about what they do versus what I do. And one distinction specifically is that in counseling and psychotherapy, and in no way, shape or form am I knocking them as a profession. I'm only talking about the dysfunctional aspect. I do have an issue with somebody who's seen a counsellor for 15 years still dragging out their story. I'm talking about the dysfunctional aspect. Is they are not allowed to share anything of a personal nature, whereas I'm the complete opposite. To be able to shift somebody out of where they're operating, you need to go toe to toe. And so I'm very open kimono with reference to how I facilitate, because I believe that you need to form a basis of trust with the recipient, and them to feel as though that they're talking to somebody that can understand their shoes. So I believe I can shift anybody out of anything. And again, my ego's in tow, people. So, and I say it because there's a sense of urgency for me to reach the people. There's so much pain out there. And here I am in New Zealand, yes, working with offshore clientele, but I have a body of work that's sitting here that needs to be in the hands of people who are working with the human condition to work as an adjunct. I have a youth program sitting here that can be saving kids' lives. That's my frustration in my own journey and understanding why do we experience what it is that we do. So for me, this is the proudest thing that I've ever done. It's the bravest thing I've ever done. And I walk the talk with reference to administering the type of healing that I do in the work.
Absolutely. Round of applause, Trevor. I agree from everybody. Yeah. Sally, you say this is the bravest thing you've ever done, but given your story, I struggle. I struggle with that, because what you've been through is absolutely phenomenal, and to come back and to be where you are today, given that background, is just mind-boggling to me. Really quite astounding. So, truly appreciative, as I say, of your openness and your sharing of your story with us. That's one of the things Wisdom's we're all about. We love to hear people's stories. We believe there's so much power and so much benefit that everybody can gain from just simply listening to a story such as yours is amazing. And so I'd absolutely love to see more of your work and hear more of your work and get to understand some of your processes and philosophies that you've developed over all these years, because it sounds completely fascinating. I'm intrigued, and yeah, I'm going around with these words because I'm not too sure where to go from here. But Lee, let's get across to you.
Sally, just in awe, really awe, that you risked sharing this the depth to which you were willing to go with us in an unknown environment. That takes and then the fact that you could speak it out in a way that you know in your heart of hearts you've done the work, and that confidence that you speak of when you say it's not ego and I've got this body of work, because you say it, but we also know it. Because you couldn't say these things if you hadn't done the internal work of what it means to process the things that have happened to you, and that you have turned that around to be able to offer to others. I think that sense of, I love what you said about war stories. I'll tell you my stories, my war stories, if you tell me your war stories. You know, growing up in Zimbabwe, it was a country that was at war in the time that I was growing up, and we used to call them worries. You know, these stories, the worries, and that's what I was thinking about when you spoke about your worries, and so just gratitude for your willingness to share, because what it does for us is it helps ignite a courage and a thinking about, how can I be more true to myself? How can I be more in tune with my own intuition? And as you say, that inner critic that's in us, and how are we listening to that inner critic, and how much power are we giving to that inner critic? So those are just some of the thoughts that came out of what you had to share. So thank you so much. I'm sure there are other people who also would like to respond and just say what it is that they drew out of what you were saying, and what touched them, and what it is that they have connected with in terms of your story. So I think if somebody would like to just put their hand, otherwise Ivan will take up.
Ed has got his hand up, so thanks, Lee. Let's go across to Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I just feel incredibly humble to sat here and listen to your story. But I was just wondering, was there one specific sort of spark that made you change from being in that sort of addictive circle and that sort of downward spiral? Was there just one little thing, or was it a series of things that made you think, well, I've got to change, I've got to move on, I've got to build something? So I'd really like to know what was the catalyst, what was the spark?
Great. So that's pretty much the main question that I get asked. So thank you for asking it. So I'm 55 now. When I was 30, I was still suicidal. Still high-powered corporate career, you know, good, facing the world, but who I was in behind the scene. And I was in a program, yet another course, and I was in the audience, and I was done, like I was done. And I put my hand up, and the course leader didn't feel that was appropriate because of the course curriculum at the time. Anyway, me being mean, I was kind of like the queen of drama back then, and had "do not fuck with me" on my forehead. And so anyway, he got me up on stage, and he called me a victim. And I had victim mean weakness. And of all the things I could say about myself, I knew I wasn't a victim. But when he made the distinction that victim is powerless to change the situation, it was like in that moment, something changed. You got a choice on how you feel. You got a choice on how you react. You got a choice on what you do. You got a choice on how you respond. My worldview was that life was doing it to me, because as a survivor, I had to create crisis to survive, crisis to survive, crisis to survive. So I was always, how many personal development books do we need to read that say, be careful what you think, your thoughts create your reality? Well, they do. But my stinking thinking was attracting chaos constantly. So that was my worldview. And so when he said to me, you actually have a choice, I never realized I had a choice. I just thought life was doing it to me. And so the two together, I got the distinction choice that day, that I actually had a choice on what I think and feel and respond. I also got that I was a victim, that because I was powerless, there wasn't an area of my life that was working. And I didn't realize that I was the one that was creating it out of my stinking thinking. And when I took self-responsibility to realize that it wasn't life doing it to me, we were talking about energy, resonance, vibration, where I was resonating out of the way that I was thinking, was creating. So I had enough evidence to sink a ship, that life wasn't fair. And so that insight, so I'm highly trained in what's termed distinction-based training, kind of like you see a car and then you see the make and model everywhere. You kind of like never saw it before, and all of a sudden you see it everywhere. It's kind of like that awakening. And pretty much from 30 through to 55, I've been a vigilante on, so for me, choice is the biggest distinction on the planet for me. And one of the mantras I live by is think, do, say, be equals forwarding the game. Is what I'm thinking forwarding the game? If it's not, I don't think it. Is what I'm doing forwarding the game? If it's not, I don't do it. Is what I'm saying forwarding the game? If it's not, I don't say it. And in who I'm being on a day-to-day basis, is that forwarding the game? If it's not, I don't be that. That trains you at a very high degree of integrity and forwards your game. But most people don't know what their game is. And so in both of the books that I wrote, I have talked about a thing called culturalization. Because we still teach the same thing in the schooling system, because we still are stuck with traditional leadership within the leadership realm, I think leaders will yawn if they have to go to another leadership training or another bloody leadership retreat. You know, they're taught the same thing. They're already unconsciously conscious in their leadership ability or their subject matter expertise. Which is why I say traditional leadership is dead. And so when I talk about culturalization, I go, the only way for human beings in our society on this planet, the way it's designed, is to learn through adversity. To evolve consciousness is usually through some form of adversity. Given that my life apprenticeship, which I believe has been in perfection to teach this, is that there is another way. That what would it be like if we evolve the consciousness beyond the need to have to attract adversity to evolve? At the moment, acts of God, tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, usually is the only way that we awaken en masse society. For all of the bad things that are happening with COVID, it's actually connecting the planet. The separation is actually creating the connection, go figure. And so I believe there is a new world order coming, whether we like it or not, and that we're being forced to evolve. So I believe I may not have been ready for people 20 years ago, but I might be in the years to come, because I've been speaking about this for such a long period of time. But back to your question, the distinction, choice changed my life, the distinction that I was a victim, powerless to change the situation. And part of being able to take self-responsibility is I am a victim and not going anywhere with that, because you can't transform that which you're unwilling to own. So until you own it, you can't transform it. And so I owned that day that I was a victim. I really, really, really landed it. And then the whole trajectory of my life changed. Does that answer your question?
Oh, thanks, Sally. Ed, you muted. Ed, you muted.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted myself. Yeah, I mean, that answered it perfectly. I think that whole thing about choice really resonates with me because we actually discussed that. Well, really, when I told my story, it was about that choice. And I think it's interesting that you didn't find that until a long time afterwards. It took a long time to come. And I think for so many people, it is that long experience. And I love this idea of a new leadership model, a new way of thinking. Because you're right.
Yep.
In schools, I did a talk at a school the other day, and it was about exam nerves. And I thought, well, before I give the talk, I'll see what exams they're sitting. And the paper they were sitting for English was exactly the same as the paper I sat for English 50 years beforehand. 50 years, and it hadn't changed. So yeah, models, nothing's changed.
Well, the strange thing with the way us humans operate is that confrontation, resistance, and uncomfortability are the three things that have people get off the court of life. And yet, the only way that change can occur is to go beyond confrontation, resistance, and uncomfortability. So training leaders, if you're a change agent, which I think if we're on this channel right now, we all are change agents in some way, shape, or form, go looking to be confronted, go looking to be resistant, go looking to be in that frame of mind, because there's a difference contextually between being empowered from a confrontational standpoint and being disempowered from a confrontational standpoint. And so you'll find that the magic and the miracles are only in the unknown. So at the irony of perverseness here with reference to COVID, I was made bankrupt in August 2018, my first time of declaring it. Now, you know, there are so many businesses on the planet going bankrupt, and they don't have the skill base of being able to know how to handle the transition out of that. I believe if you've been fired, if you've been made redundant, if you've gone bankrupt, there is something from a higher power perspective going on. And I know from my own journey that the universe has me exactly where they want me. I maybe have come here kicking and screaming, questioning why on so many different levels, but I feel as though I've come full circle 2 years ahead of the COVID situation that's now globally impacting so many businesses, to be able to be there for them. So, and especially at the level that I coach at, to be able to support others that have been character assassinated, those that have been, that are trying to make the world a better place, and that it's imperfection, and teaching that is an interesting dynamic.
Great, thanks, Sally. Yeah, I think I love that. You know, you cannot do anything from within the comfort zone, can you? I mean, you've got to get out there and confront and challenge and look for those unknowns. So yeah, absolutely beautiful. Right, is there anybody else who would like to add in a comment or a thought? Trevor, you opened up again.
Only if there's no one else that wants to jump in. I mean, I've got 3 hours worth of questions. I'm cancelling Doyle Bueller. Don't tell him for the next session. Oh, Doyle, sorry. No, okay, Doyle, you can come on board there, but only if someone else
Yeah. Okay.
is not there.
I think Umpolelo wants to add something in. Trevor?
Yeah, good morning, Sal. It's quite an amazing story to hear. I think for me, what always stands out when I hear such stories is just how much resilience there is in a human being. I think sometimes we take that for granted because resilience speaks to an ability to stand up against. And that means there's resistance. And for me, that's just a powerful thing to experience in any form or shape. Also, given that obviously one has also had their own challenges that you then have to rise up against. I guess the question I'd have for you is that, given the new leadership thinking you're talking about, how is the world or the spaces you've worked in receiving that new concept, given where the world is in terms of leadership today?
Beautiful. What a nice question. So specifically the boardroom table I find interesting. I wrote an article last week around transparency. And when was the last time you actually had each of your individual leaders present like an open kimono story, that they share their individual stories with the executive, so that you actually get to know who they are beyond the facade of how we're supposed to show up in business. Have conversations around faith. You know, so many leaders that I coach, if they do have a faith, whether that's a religious faith or a spiritual faith, I've coached everybody from every spectrum, whether it's a religious right through to atheist, you name it, I've coached it. And specifically at that level, what stops you talking about faith at the executive table? Why can't we have those conversations? We're spiritual beings having a human experience. What would it be like if I talk about power-based cultures versus default-based cultures, given that I specialize in the default identity. And KPI-empowered cultures have to do with being able to understand the psyche behind the undercurrent that's happening within the organization. So how receptive are they? I have been talking for 20 years at that level about co-creativity, which is the layman term that I use for faith. So if I talk about faith, I'll automatically collapse it into religion, and it's usually resistant. If I talk about co-creativity, the zone, the vortex, the slipstream, terminology like that. I can get away with CEOs. There's a lot of little boys, little girls running businesses who haven't done the work. Healing at the executive level. I talk about how integral we have human beings in every single organization on the planet. Every single, regardless of what your childhood was like, everything stems from childhood. So when you're working with the head of an organization who hasn't done the work, then, you know, if they have gender issues, usually that's due to their issues with their mother or their father, the first primary male or female role model. So in answer to your question, the receptivity is there so long as you have a facilitator who can facilitate contextually the conversation. And sadly, there are many thought leaders, I believe, out there who are doing great work, who would love to have more freedom in communication to facilitate human issues at that level, which are needed, but they may lack the facilitation skills on being able to have it land. I've just been in the trenches for so many years. I'm a teller. I've earned the right to be one, and get away with it.
Great, thanks, Sally. Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? The power of the facilitation, the power of the story, two very, very important elements in the process of any form of transformation. I think absolutely key. Right. Any other folk want to make some final comments? I think
I hope that did answer your question. Cool.
Great, thanks. I'm sure we could carry on chatting to Sally all day at this rate. That's some really fascinating insights and ideas and thoughts that are going around. So yeah, okay, Trevor, back to you.
Yeah, well, I just put my question into the chat forum for Sally to pick up later, but I think let me bring it up here. I want to know, does Sally feel as though she is woman alone in moving now from where she is? And she talked of this bankruptcy, but been able to take that learning experience and now share with all of these people that are going to be confronting what Sally had to confront. And I agree with her. You are put through these things to be able to help other people get out of them. And I think Sally is perfectly positioned. But because I think at scale, I'm wondering, how does Sally think? And I don't think we have enough time for this, so maybe in the chat facility or whatever, Sally. But are you thinking that scale, or are you thinking that I'm going to be woman alone? I'm just going to market myself as a speaker, or is there something bigger? And I want to know how we collectively, as we are growing this, can help Sally. Because in helping Sally, I believe we help ourselves. I think what you've got to offer to us is just phenomenal. You don't know how you're going to help us grow on a global basis if we help you, sort of scenario. So that's what I'm excited about. What else was there? And is Sally woman alone? Man, as I say, I wanted to cancel Doyle Bueller, but he knows that I think he's the best speaker I've ever come across. When he came and spoke on the World Trade Fair Africa, that was up until today, Doyle, so I hope you can kick it up a gear. Sally, I just want to thank you for the most magnificent contribution to this. And as I say, it's only just begun.
You humble me, my friend. But just to quickly answer your question, I believe part of what is happening on the planet and part of what I've experienced myself, faith has played a huge part for me. I'm not personally religious. I don't call what I believe anything. I just am 24/7 connected, and training leaders on how to access that co-creativity to be able to evolve to that level of awareness is a profound gift. So live coaching is my thing. Throw anything at me, anytime, anywhere, any place, anytime is, I've moved away from keynote speaking because it's not interactive. So I'm a dangerous woman to talk to. Language is my vehicle. So which is why kids are the hardest to coach, because they don't say anything. But language is my vehicle. And so part of my stand is that I know I'm where I need to be, but I have education that needs to get into the hands of people who are hurting. If anybody can help with that aspect, I would welcome it with open arms. I do not feel alone. As a spiritual being, you can never be alone. I have a very integrated relationship with my faith, which I feel very blessed by. And I know that the body of work that I have developed can change the human psyche on the planet. I know that without a doubt. And I have been through what I have for a reason, and would love support on that basis.
Great stuff. And I just want to throw in that you have a whole lot of rugby players there that need some help, Sally. So together, from our side, together with yours, we'll work something out here.
He had to get that one in, didn't he, Sally? Yeah, he had to get that one in. Okay, folks, I think we're almost at the top of the hour. So once again, from all of us, Sally, absolutely appreciative. Thank you so much for your time and your words. It's been a real privilege to listen to you this morning. And so I love that so much. So folks,